It's Brian Preston, the money guy.
This next question is from Ashley. Ashley said, how much cash is appropriate to have on hand? We have a 6-month emergency fund in cash, but we also have savings accounts for our vacations, vehicles, remodeling, projects, and so on. Should any of this be invested? Now, I'm asking this question, Brian, because, we both have family members that they do like these envelopes.
That's
right?
what I was sitting here thinking, the envelope method.
An envelope for this, an envelope for this, an envelope for this, an envelope for this. And so when I was like, I'll ask them, like, hey, how much do you have in your emergency fund? They'll be like, oh, I got, 30 grand. I'll be like, great. Well, what about the car fund? Oh, well, that's another like 3 grand. Well, what about this? Oh, that's another. I'm like, no, you don't have 30 grand in your emergency fund. You have like 90 grand in your emergency fund or whatever the number is. What's the best way to think about that? Or what are some things you can put in place so that you don't end up being very, very cash heavy?
So I think that's interesting because that shows how you and I process things a little differently. It's because you looked at that example you gave, they don't have 30,000, they actually have 90 because you take into account all those different pots of money. Meanwhile, I'm sitting there because I think it's kind of like, do you see the gold dress or do you see the, because it's just glass half full, glass half empty, is in the fact that I do think that there's a complete difference between things you're planning for that will occur in the next, 3 years versus, oh my goodness, thank goodness I have money in the rainy day fund to get me through this horrible period for losing a job, things that break down, because they're completely different. One is a contingency plan money, that's your emergency reserves. The other is these things will happen. Now look, you are not wrong though, because a lot of these things that we're planning for, that stuff can pivot very quickly. Sure. And you just say, you know what, maybe I'm not buying a car. It looks like the sky's falling outside. I think I'd rather have this cash than to go buy the car right now. Yep. Or, maybe I delay this purchase here. So that money can be fluid in the fact that it goes into the rainy day fund. So I don't think either one of us is wrong. Sure. But I think it is something that is very personalized and individualized to the point that I just want to make sure that if something happens to your job, how you pay for your mortgage, how you pay for your debt payments or anything else is coming, you are protected for that 3 to 6 months of period of time. And what determines 3 versus 6 months? How hard will it be to go get another job?
That's right.
And as long as you can keep those things in check, you can then analyze your side pots, these envelopes that you've set up for vacations, for the cars, and you can ask yourself, hey, is this something that has some ability to go back and forth, that maybe this is emergency reserves because I don't have to buy the car? You just want to kind of have a plan that encompasses all of it. And that's why financial planning is not just, it's not where you have a plate of food. And if you're one of the type of people that you have to eat all your green beans before you can get to mashed potatoes, it doesn't necessarily work that way. Well, financial planning is something where it's more like a casserole, and the fact that you're mixing stuff up in a lot of different ways, and you have to take it all into account. Yeah, I don't know if that works. I just made that up on the spot.
While we were recording it, I can tell that you're hungry too, because it's like right around lunchtime. Because I was sitting there thinking, man, that sounds delicious.
I'd like to have a casserole. Yeah, I'd like to have some green beans.
Eating that right now.
I get it.
Oh, that's hilarious.
It's Brian Preston, the money guy.
All right, this first question is from Chris. And this is a good one right now. So Chris said, hey, with inflation running rampant, do you have any suggestions for keeping pace? So obviously, we even talked about on the show where we covered housing, about how housing prices are increasing. It seems like inflation is a thing that's coming, or if it's not here yet, it potentially could be coming. Are there ways we should think about it when it comes to our wealth building journey and how we make decisions?
Oh, for sure. I mean, Chris, by the way, great question. And this is one of those things where you have to think about what is actually going on. What's the cause? Are there distortions? Are there arbitrage situations? And this is just my own personal take on this, is that I've noticed, and there's all kind of, they showed where the 10-year treasury has been versus where, actual rates are and inflation. That's what they compared inflation with the 10-year treasury. And there's been a huge separation because when you overlaid this historically, there was some correlation. You look at, but you can when you see that now that 10-year treasury is not budging, it's going up slightly. But meanwhile, inflation's 6, 7, 8%, depending upon 40% if you're talking about fuel. And then you see the 10-year treasury is still bopping around to 1.5 to 1.6%. You're like, something's off. It's because it's being manipulated. I mean, without a doubt, our government and the central bankers have every incentive to keep interest rates low because they're in debt up to their eyeballs. So they're manipulating the interest rates to be extremely low. So that's the first thing to pay attention to. Meanwhile, we have all this money floating around out there in the economy. That is causing, because you have all this money floating around there, is there's demand for goods, but we also realize when we shut down the government, the economy because of lockdowns and so forth, that engine of operation doesn't just crank right back up. So there's been a lot of labor issues, there's been supply chain issues. So here's my guidance. We know that inflation, they call it transitory. I don't think it's going away. I'm not so sure because like I was talking to a neighbor, their company does something with cabinets and housing, and they said, hey, we raised prices 15, 20% because truthfully there were supply chain issues. We got those issues fixed, but there's still so much demand. We're keeping prices up. So I'm not so sure people are going to put the genie back in the bottle. I think since prices have gone up, there's plenty of demand in the marketplace. Prices will stay up. So you have to start thinking about, what does this mean for my wallet? What does this mean for my decision making? The first general statement is it's good to own stuff.
That's right.
So when I say it's good to own stuff, I'm talking about real estate, of course, is going to do incredibly well, especially when, and look, I'm not a big debt fan. I don't love debt, but there is an arbitrage situation in the fact that they will let you buy highly appreciating assets like real estate with very small interest rates, because interest rates are artificially low right now. That does create an opportunity. But in addition to traditional things like real estate, the stocks that you own are also going to be something that's going to be very effective in the long term. Yes, they're going to have hiccups as companies are trying to figure out the pricing. Just like that cabinet company I mentioned, they had a hiccup initially because of supply chain issues, but now that they've raised prices and they fixed the supply chain, do you know what that extra, cost is going to? It's actually profit.
It's profit.
It's now falling to the bottom side of the income statement as profit, and there's no need for them to lower it because there's still tremendous demand for the cabinets they're making. You're seeing this all around the world on vehicles, appliances. So owning the companies that make that stuff, or owning the S&P 500, owning index funds is going to be able to capitalize on those things as well. That's the way I'm approaching this thing. I think it's good to own things in this economy because as inflation hits, everything you own is going to appreciate. But it's also understand healthy leverage. I'm not saying go out there and over leverage, but understanding that we have a situation where debt is so cheap. It is pushing people further out on the risk spectrum. And then with all that guidance, I'm going to say one more big thing over here. And this is probably, I hope I'm not stealing this from Bo. You better have plenty of cash. And I know cash earns nothing right now, but if you're doing things like that arbitrage with low interest and buying real estate with it and other things, make sure your pockets are deep enough that you can weather any type of market volatility that might come. That if all of a sudden the economy got beat up and you weren't collecting rent that month, or for 3 months or 4 months or even 6 months, you would be okay. That's the mistake people make with leveraged assets, is they get into them, but they get into them skinny dipping naked. And then when the tide goes out because you didn't have cash to cover out any shortfalls or anything else, you find yourself in a pickle of a situation. So pay attention to those things. I'm okay with, like I said, healthy leverage is okay as long as you're carrying around big pockets in the background to get you through whatever's coming.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add to that, and it's very much in line with that last thing you said, is maybe you're not someone out there trying to buy real estate or trying to go take on leverage, but you said, man, inflation is coming and maybe interest rates are rising. Don't allow that to be something that moves you too far out on the risk spectrum.
That's great.
Where you say, you know what, oh no, I need to own assets, I need to own businesses, I need to own companies. So instead of being in a 60-40 portfolio that makes sense for me, I'm going to go to a 90-10. Because here's what we don't know. We don't know when the next downturn is going to happen. We don't know what the market's going to do. We don't know how long the bull market is going to last. We don't know when the next bear market's going to start. We don't know how bad it's going to be. We don't know how long it's going to take to come out of it. When you don't know those things, you want to make sure that you're not caught naked. Because when you're skinny dipping naked and the tide goes out, That's when everybody sees that you were skinny dipping and you get yourself into a bad spot. So don't let your inflationary concerns cause you to go too far out on the risk spectrum, because you may be creating another problem by trying to solve that problem. Because I think a lot of people have been asking me that, and there's a reason you hold cash in your portfolio. There's a reason you hold risk-off assets in your portfolio. There's a reason you hold bonds in your portfolio. Don't lose sight of that. Just make sure you're doing it in a way that makes sense given the current environment that we're in.
It's Brian Preston, the money guy.
Jakester said, I bought a 20-year term life policy at age 30 for 10 times salary. You must listen to the Money Guy show. Now, at age 40, with a 9-year-old kid, and my salary has doubled. Do I get a brand new 20-year policy for the same amount, or do I ladder it somehow? How do I think about changing my life insurance as my financial and life circumstances change as I age? I added that last part, but that's what he's asking.
I think this is actually, it's amazing how your brain just goes through multiple scenarios. It's really a twofold question. I mean, I would first, because here's the unique thing about term life insurance. It was a great deal when you were 30 years of age, but you'd be surprised that, now I'd be curious to know if the pandemic impacted insurance tables and so forth, but historically, even though you've gotten older, insurance was getting cheaper and cheaper. So you've got a little bit of homework. Did you say Jakester?
Jakester, that's his
Jakester,
name.
you got a little bit of homework in the first in the part. First of all, don't go cancel your 20-year term that you bought when you were 30. That needs to keep rolling in the background while you're doing your due diligence and research. But you might want to do this as a multiple prong approach, in the fact that I would first go price out what is the additional insurance you need to, because you make more money, you have maybe more kids or whatever the scenario. Go price out just how much more insurance you need based upon how life has changed from the time you were 30 to 40 years of age. That's going to be one premium quote that you'll get. The second one's going to be, hey, what if I just reset the whole thing? If I add both policies up, what would that cost to just reset the term on that 20-year term? And then you can compare apples to apples. Maybe it makes sense to go buy a $2 million one policy, or maybe it just makes sense to, on top of that $500,000 or $1 million, whatever you bought originally, put another $1 million on top of it. That's the math. It's going to come down to the mathematics after you do your research of getting those quotes.
One thing that I've been amazed by, and I may be misremembering this, but Brian, I think when you turned 40, we walked through this whole exercise, right? Because same thing had happened. You had kids and circumstances and change. We were trying to figure out your life insurance stuff. And we did the whole exercise like, man, that 20-year, am I remembering this right? You said that 20-year was really, really inexpensive. I wonder what a 30-year policy
I was 37 years
37,
of age.
So we weren't quite 40 yet. One of the things people don't realize is you can actually change, when we say term, people often get married to, that means a 20-year term. That's not always the case. You can buy 10-year term policies, 20-year term policies, 30-year term policies. So you might find, if you are in really good health and you get a really advantageous health rating and the premiums aren't incredibly expensive relative to your financial situation, you may say, you know what, at 40, I'm going to go ahead and get a 30-year policy, because odds are that's going to take me not just to financial independence, but well into financial independence. And then I always have the option that I can drop it at some point in the future. Am I remembering that
No,
right?
because here's the thing, and I don't mind. This is like I said, I'm the tangent guy. I got that policy, and I just, you're right. The 20-year term was so cheap. I was like, I want to know what a 30-year term. And when they offered me the rate, I was like, you know what? Just as a gift to myself, because realize I come from a household where my dad passed away at 55, my grandfather passed away at 50, because there's all kind of heart conditions and other weird things in my family history. But I'm very proactive with trying to do the biohacking, the way I do the fasting. And so when they offered me this policy that would take me to age 67, I bought it. Because, guys, I got to tell you, in this a non-financial feeling, I mean, it was probably about 3 weeks to a month that I just walked around on cloud nine, because I was like,
good.
Man, there's somebody that thinks I'm going to live to be 67 years of age, and they actually are financially pot committed that they gave me this policy. So, I mean, there is something, there's a lot to take into consideration with insurance, and including underwriting risk and so forth. But I think the things I just told Jakester on it's a two-pronged research, but also do take into account those other elements that I just mentioned. You know, what is your life expectancy? What does your family history look like? All that comes into play. But the biggest thing is making sure while you don't have assets that will replace your income, because that's the value of insurance, is that you left sooner than you anticipated and your family or loved ones still needed the resources that you were supposed to provide them. That's the backfill support that life insurance is supposed to provide. There is going to come a point. It's just like at age 65. Am I going to need that term life insurance? No, I'm not going to need it at 55. But that's the other thing. And this is, I'm going way deeper on this. You don't just let those policies go away either, because because realize the way insurance works is it overcharges you while you're young, and then it's undercharging you while you're old, but you're getting the benefit. The insurance company's kind of filling the void for you. So if you are in your late 50s or mid 60s and you still have life insurance, if it's term, you don't just let it go. You might just want to let it play out all the way to the end of its term, because you're actually getting some benefit from the cost of benefit of what you're paying in insurance dollars. You're getting more protection financially.
And you said this at the beginning, but it's worth just repeating very quickly. Never cancel a life insurance policy until you have a new policy in place. We've seen this before where someone got their renewal notice and they thought, oh man, I don't lose money, so I'm just going to let that policy cancel and then I'll go get new insurance next month.
No.
Well, you never know what could happen. Maybe you had a doctor's appointment you forgot about 4 years ago that put something on your record that affected your rating for insurance. Never cancel old policies until you have the new policy in place, if that's the decision that you make.
It's Brian Preston, the Money Guy.
This next question is from Chase, Brian. Chase says, at Money Guys, I would like to use my HSA as a retirement vehicle. Do you have any recommendations of software to track expenses and receipts? Currently, I'm just using Google Docs. So I think to catch everyone up, maybe you should talk about the 3 ways that people use health savings accounts. And then why don't you share kind of what your process is for how you're tracking? Are you using a software? Are you doing something more analog?
Remember, we love, if you think about step number 5 of the financial order of operations, this is really the box for tax-free growth. You have HSAs and Roth IRAs. We love HSAs because they're even better in some ways than Roth in the fact that they are triple tax advantage. Because remember, you get a current year tax deduction. They grow tax deferred. And then if you pull them out actually for qualified medical expenses, they come out completely tax-free. Now, what Chase is asking is not going to potentially grow completely tax-free if he is going to use this for retirement expenses. But I'm going to tweak what Chase is asking, assuming that he actually means that he wants to pay for his health care costs in retirement, because that is going to be money that's coming out anyway. So how do we do this in the most efficient way possible? Well, we have found, and I think the number was 94%. I can't remember if it was 94 or 96. It was 94, 96. Those are two, because only 4% of the population is actually using the triple tax advantage. Most people are doing, they put the money in, they get the tax deduction, and then they take it back out to repay themselves. If you think about it, that's only a single tax advantage benefit. You got a tax deduction and you repaid yourself. To get the other 2 components, you actually have to invest the money, let it grow over time, and then spend it for qualified medical expenses, so it is actually tax-free growth. And I've shared that in my own use, I pay out of pocket all my medical expenses, which I know is that's a luxury. Not everybody has that ability. I think that's why it's a clearing account for most people. But if you are a financial mutant that has the cash flow where you can pay current year medical expenses, you can track, you can keep your receipts, you can keep all these things, and then over the years, let the money be invested in your HSA and grow. Because like me, I have an autistic daughter. So, I mean, her private school, which costs a fortune, actually, I get a letter every year from the institution as well as doctors saying, your daughter needs this special type of school. That's a huge cost. So it doesn't matter how good my HSA is doing, I will have expenses that I could offset for tax-free growth. And that's why I do want to invest and pay myself back in the future at some point. So the thing I actually invested, I think, by the way, a lot of people don't realize this. Fidelity now offers HSAs.
Yep.
I was trying to chase down who was the best HSA provider. As soon as I found out Fidelity had one, they don't pay me to tell you that, guys. I'm just telling you, that's what I ended up updating to Fidelity. But Chase's question is, how do you make it tax-free? Is there software? I'm using Excel. I mean, I'm no different. It sounds like you're using Google Sheets. I think that I don't know if somebody's developed, and I think, like I said, there's only 4% of the population that's using it this financial mutant way. I don't know if somebody's thought there's enough dollars to go get crazy and invest in software.
I think some people probably, I would imagine there's some sort of function in Quicken where you could do this, but I'm the same as you, Brian. What I do is I keep a spreadsheet where I put the date the service happened, the date that it was paid, who in my family it was for, who the provider was, and then how I paid for it.
Yeah.
I put those all in a spreadsheet, and then whenever I get the invoice or the bill or whatever, I just scan that in and keep an electronic copy of my record, and I do it by year. So I've got my spreadsheet with each year on it, and then I have my electronic record. I don't actually like file away hard copies. I keep them all in electronic. I think that will be okay. And so it doesn't take a lot of time, and now that I kind of have this system in place, it's pretty straightforward and pretty standard.
Yeah, and you definitely want to have a good documentation system, but recognize when you actually claim these benefits, the IRS is only going to ask for the receipts if you get audited. And now I want you to be, because remember, I've sat through audits, I've represented people in audits. You want to be on solid ground. So this is I want you always, we legally try to avoid as much taxation as possible, but it's going to be legal. We're going to be on solid ground. We don't want the shaky gray stuff. So make sure you do have good receipts, but I don't think you have to put yourself in such a way that you're worked up that there is some big, when you file that tax return, you're going to have to send them every receipt you ever did. No, you just need to be able to show them.
That's right.
If you ever got audited or questioned on it.
It's Brian Preston, the money guy.
All right, Carlos says, I'm 24 and my spouse is 23. We're maxing out our Roth IRAs, our Roth 401ks, and our HSAs.
Wow, at 24 and 23.
24 and 23. We have access to mega backdoor Roth, but are not using it yet because we're investing 33%. We're concerned about investing in these Roth accounts because they will grow to $10 million by 55. Should we start taking advantage of the mega backdoor, or should we just do the brokerage because it sounds like we don't need to try to get to $10 million in our Roth anymore?
Well, Carlos, good news. With the new legislation that's on the table, you're not going to have to choose between the mega Roth because it's going to go away. You're not going to have the option to go there. And I would encourage you, be careful of, because I get it. I mean, if you're running a 10% annual rate of return, you're looking at because your age is just so incredibly maxing out, and you're going to be so rewarded that your 50-something-year-old self is going to be so sloppy happy that they're going to cry all over you if they could, hypothetically. If they could give you a hug, they would, and you'd have like tear stains because they're just so happy that you're saving so much at such a young age. But you don't have to worry about the mega Roth. I think it's going away. I wouldn't let the $10 million scare me from saving in those Roth accounts while